debate, and the title is National Appropriate Mitigation Actions for Forest and Other Land Uses of Indonesia. Do we see complementarity of policy instruments, funding streams, and motivation? This is part of a synthesis paper of the Red Alert project. I have three co-authors. One of them is in the audience here, Dr. Famudin Agus, Sonia Devi, and Harry Purnomo. And we heard about, is the window closing? We heard about different issue curves. One thing that we actually used 5 years ago was this hope height crash reality. We were starting with, few people knew anything about REDD. We were increasing, the hope was increasing, the hope became hype. We crashed, and after the crash, we can actually start talking seriously about whether it's working or not. And you, in any political processes, you have to go through that hype crash phase before people can take it seriously. The question is, in the end, do we end up in a mildly positive or mildly negative way? And the question is there path dependence? Is it, if you've crashed early enough, you might still end up in a mildly positive mode. If you crash too late, you might definitely end up in negative. So where are we? And if we say the window is closing, how can we link that back to how the discussion has moved along? Another version of the issue curve is this one that we developed with Tom Tomic many years ago. And basically, where are we in that domain? Well, we definitely got stuck at the point when people have to pay. And it moved along until we were at that point. And it seems at the moment that we were almost there, but at the moment I think that threshold of being almost there is coming down. And I think very few people in this audience would still be as optimistic as many of us were 5 years ago. Baba Yuri might remember this slide. This was 5 years ago with the IFCA process before the COP in Bali. And we were very optimistic. We did a number of things in 2007. And then 5 years, very long time of change, and by end of 2012, we would definitely be ready for widespread application of the whole part. And we could not imagine at this point in time that we would be where we are right now. And so I'd like to frame this presentation with all the co-authors we were involved with the IFCA last time, and looking back in what did we say 5 years ago, what have we learned in between, and what does it mean for the way forward? And as part of the IFCA process, a number of us were start to think about what is this REDD, what animal would it be, how many legs would it have, and how many tails. And the group I was involved with, we came actually in with we saw 5 big challenges ahead of us. And the 5 challenges were, first of all, what is the scope? What is the definition? What forest would it be? And still, how many Ds and pluses would we add to the part? What is the issue about peat, that is a large part of emissions in Indonesia, and that is outside forest? What about rights and legality? What about the interlinkage of things in the landscape, and what about leakage? And how to balance fairness and efficiency? And I frame my talk looking back at these 5 issues and see, have we actually made progress on these critical 5? And where are we now? And have we made progress or not? Now, in that point in time, we use this graph to explain things about forest transition, tree cover transition. And we explained fairness versus efficiency at that point about, okay, it's fairness to make sure that it's incentive for the people who are actually in the low threat zone, and it is efficient to focus on the immediate threat zone, and there is an optimal threat part on that front. But exactly where that threshold is of the optimal threat would partly depend on what we mean by forest and what is included and what is excluded from the domain. Now, in putting together our current thinking, we've been using this pyramid. Some of you may know Maslow's pyramid in psychology, individuals. What drives a person? Well, what drives the government? Well, the government drives, of course, they care about their territorial integrity, the safety of their borders, and this and that. They care about having enough food in the cities and keeping the people off the street and keeping the government in function. They care about economic growth with distribution, and beyond that they may care about trade, and they may care about maybe branding. At some point some people might actually care about environmental issues, and the core is the core identity. There we are. So And of course, in practice, a lot of it is driven by elite and elite capture that tries to keep you pretty down on that pyramid. So REDD came in as pretty low on the pyramid, pretty basic. Yeah? As long as REDD rents would be higher than forest rents, we would satisfy the economic part and we wouldn't have to bother about any of the other issues. So REDD came in pretty low in the pyramid. At the same time, we saw other concerns coming up, and the concerns coming up for a country like Indonesia, well, we make a living by exporting pulp and paper and oil palm oil and other stuff, and people are worried that our oil palm is destroying tigers and orangutans and whatever, and we need to get our act together on that level. And at the same time, another issue came up. Well, some of us actually care, yeah? And we created the NAMA, the Nationally Appropriate Mitigation Action, next to REDD, as we can do things ourselves. We don't depend on the outside world, we want to be there. So where are we now with REDD? Is it about money? As long as it pays, we'll do it. Or is it interacting with our trade and our image and our branding? Or is it actually we care about this issue ourselves? And I think this is a frame that we'll use to see where have we come, where have we moved, and where would we progress. And of course, in all of this, we'll need knowledge and awareness, and this is the game that we play. At the same time, because REDD came in so low in the pyramid, people had concerns about ecology and social things, and we've been loading the whole REDD debate with safeguards. And safeguards actually are these concerns for the higher level of the pyramids that we need to do if we come out at the low level, we just do it for the money. Yeah. So what are these 5 issues? Well, the first issue we said was about scope and definitions. Well, I myself work for the World Agroforestry Center, and we are very much concerned with the trees in the landscape. And we've been fighting with a world that has been artificially divided in agriculture here, forestry there. And in the landscape, we see an awful lot that is both agriculture and forestry. And we see an institutional frame that is actually very artificial, based on dichotomies where the landscape is a gradient. Is this deforestation? Of course it is not deforestation if you read the Kyoto protocol-based forest definition, because forest can be temporarily unstocked and there is no time limit to what temporarily means. So early on we developed this diagram about forest and trees. We said there are only 4 types of land. This forest that has trees, simple. There's non-forest without trees, simple. There are actually quite a lot of trees outside forest, and we don't quite know where they belong. And there is forest without trees. So we have only 4 types of land, and the challenge is how much is where. Now, as soon as we say that, and then we go back and see, well, what is deforestation rate? Does it mean that forest land loses its trees, or does it mean that trees outside forest disappear from the landscape? What forest do we mean, and what is in this data, what is not in the data? And is REDD about an institutional concept of forest, that part of the world that is managed by forestry departments, or is it about tree cover in the landscape? And what are these data that we have? So we worked on this point that if we cannot define it, then we cannot save it. And this whole issue of REDD is first of all about what forest definition do we want to use? Whose forest are we trying to deal with, and whose forest are we ignoring in the process? And this is data for Indonesia, 1990 to 2010. If we see on the upper part, we see the type of, we have 7 types of tree cover between natural forest, logged forest, and agroforest, and plantations, and tree crop estates, and shrubland that is temporarily unstocked and still on its way to be forest. And actually, if we have the most relaxed forest definition, Indonesia is already in positive mode. We see an increase of Kyoto definition type forest in Indonesia. At the same time, we see a rapid decline of the remaining natural forest. And if we express it as deforestation rates, we see that depending on forest definition, the deforestation rate of Indonesia is 3% and increasing to 5%, and things are really getting very bad. Or the deforestation rate is pretty low, and actually now it's already negative. We've solved the problem. Well, depending on the definition, we can fit any definition that matches your expectations. And it really matters, do we come at it from an ecological perspective, a biodiversity-based perspective? Do we come at it from a forest institutional perspective? And for deforestation doesn't have much meaning until we've specified what whose forest it is. And we've documented that these trees outside forest and the agroforest, well, they can keep the current emissions going for 6-7 years if we do that. And unless we specify what we do, the total tree cover in the country, deforestation doesn't quite help. In terms of our most recent data on carbon stocks, we see a big jump from the logging. We lose 1/3. We lose another 1/3 when we go into the agroforest domain, and we lose another 1/6 if we go to the plantations, and we go another 6 when we go to any crop. So we go stepwise down, and what tree cover it is matters a lot. Earlier we had this question, is it REDD with a single D? Well, that would mean if you would have a land use transition matrix, if it would only be deforestation, it means going from forest to non-forest, so on the right-hand block. If it would be REDD, it would also about the changes within forest categories. If it would be REDD plus, it would be all these parts here, and it would be everything if we would actually deal with everything, and if we would talk about reducing emissions from all land uses, and that's the alternative we have been pushing. Now, we can take this forest transition concept in an empirical way to within Indonesia to at the district scale, and we see many different phases. And although Indonesia was a single dot on the earlier graph that you saw of others, we have all the possible colors and of the conditions within that country itself, and we can make it empirical. So, actually, we have de facto solved this problem of definition by moving into the NAMA, by talking about the nationally appropriate mitigation action, and by talking about the land-based emissions of that. And for Indonesia, it no longer matters what is forest, what is non-forest. What matters is the changing carbon stock and the emissions. And we moved substantially beyond that by taking that step. Rights and legality, that is a very tricky issue. Earlier this year, the Indonesian Constitutional Court ruled on a case that was brought by local governments in central Kalimantan, and that challenged an ambiguity that exists in the forestry law. And the forestry law says that forest in Indonesia is anything that is designated or gazetted as forest, and then it is forest. So we don't need any trees, but designation or gazettement. And it wasn't quite clear whether that is an and/or whether it implies both. It was used by interpreted as anything that the Ministry of Forestry says is forest, and the local government claimed that, well, no, we haven't been involved with that. The law prescribes a process of gazettement that has only been followed for 10% of the country. And now, the Constitutional Court ruled in favor of the local government, and it said gazettement is the process to make state forest, and until that is done, 60% of Indonesia is in legal limbo. The Ministry of Forestry has been managing it on the understanding that they are in charge, but the legal process to prove that has not been followed. So, a fairly big problem. I mean, it is about, we talk about 55–60% of Indonesia, and there are big challenges. And we've seen that coming through very clearly at the local level. The Central Kalimantan peatland project we saw 4 or 5 years ago. It's not hotspots of emissions, it's hotspots of confusions, hotspots of contested policies between local people and governments and the central level. And that has flared up and yeah, this take that whole project apart because it wasn't taken serious. At the same time, we've seen positive modes that legal instruments like the village forest designation have been used and have been seen as part of the answer to make this happen. And we've seen some positive examples of where shifts on the legality and shifts on the agreements on forest are moving forward and partly stimulated by the REDD debate. So, a bit mixed issue, I think. We definitely, 5 years ago, there was a lot of denial, there was a lot of this can't be true and this is not our issue. The issue has been recognized. The Ministry of Forestry has made targets about how much we should be doing on this. It is moving up, but definitely far from being resolved as yet. Interlinkage and leakage. Yeah, where are we on the forest transition? And we clearly see this. We call this forest transition, tree cover transition. We see all these different drivers acting in different parts of the tree cover transition curve. And we see the shift in tenure as an important part to make progress on that front. And we, at the moment, have a larger program, a global program, to look at these tree cover transitions with 5 big questions. A, is this a temporal pattern? B, is it a spatial pattern? C, is it an institutional challenge? And what drives the switch? And what is the linkage between? And is what happens on the right-hand side of the curve influencing what happens on the left? And yes and no, and how can we understand that part? And that is actually still open to empirical work that we're doing right now. One part is for Indonesia, we can look at the left-hand side of the curve and the right-hand side of the curve, and is the area in between getting wider or getting narrower? We can look at the ratio of the loss of natural forest and the return of tree cover in that landscape, and we see phases that the forest transition is moving over the whole landscape. We have phases that it actually gets wider, we have phases that it gets narrower. If we look at Indonesia data for the 1990s, light color here means that you lose forest faster than trees get planted. Dark colors mean trees get planted faster than they get lost. And we see in the 1990s, by and large, light colors, so Indonesia was, the forest transition was widening. After 2000, we moved to a phase that we see a lot of dark colors coming in, so actually more trees are being planted than natural forest is lost. Only the trees being planted are Eleus guineensis, Hevea brasiliensis and Acacia mengium, and some of these some of you, the audience, would recognize as being trees that belong to the forest and others that trees that belong to agriculture. So we've seen in that thing how we move in this interlinkage between land uses. We move from opportunity costs reflecting back, and that's what we had 5 years ago. Opportunity cost has spatial explicit part towards forward-looking scenarios and modeling with local governments and what they do, and ultimately agent-based modeling and fine-level understanding what's happening. And I think we've made by and large progress on the REDD issue because NAMA allows us to move to the local government. It allows us to look at integrated actions between forest and agriculture and focus on local livelihoods and sustainable options and get out of the forest box per se. Peat. Peat is a big part of the emissions. For example, Jambi without peat would be in the lower category. Jambi with peat is in the highest category of it. We've seen specific hotspots of debate around peat inside forest, outside forest areas that were part of the moratorium, then were taken out of it, etc., etc. A recent court case has actually moved in favor of the conservation elements of that front. So, yes, we've seen peat is still not part of REDD. De facto, REDD projects have worked on peat as if it is part of it. In Durban, some peat restoration was seen as part of CDM, so there is some recognition at the high level. In practice, people have moved. Anyway, if we would move at landscape scale, we don't have issue and don't need to sort it out. Fairness and efficiency, the real big one, and we've seen economists seen this as an exchange of money versus environmental services. Social scientists have seen this as an exchange of respect, recognition versus commitment. And you can't go in and just pay some money and expect people to do it if you don't take these people seriously. And so we see the big challenge, is it an economic issue on the right-hand side of this, and is it about efficiency, or is it about fairness, and is it about social exchanges? Yeah, and is it, how do the voice of these people count who actually work with trees in their landscape? And this is closely linked to the overall challenge of offsets and can I pay you to cut emissions so that I don't have to? And yeah, the undermining of the motivational levels by this dimension of offset part. Now we've done a big review of the payment for environmental services literature, which comes to a number of important conclusions. That PES is usually defined as if it is an economic instrument, and in practice it is a social interaction between outside and local agents, and it needs to be understood in that way. PES, by and large, is a co-investment. The PES that works on the ground is a co-investment, a social contract, and yet it is seen as an economic interaction, and we need to move forward to understand what it really is. The simple version, if you take 5 capitals, we think of PES is a relation between landscapes that have lots of natural capital and little money, and others that have plenty of money and a lack of natural capital, and okay, it's economically efficient if the rich guys pay some money there and get some natural capital back. Well, that's how PES is defined, a buyer and a seller, and they both meet their targets by that interaction. In reality, it has to be fairly complex links between the social capital on both sides, the human capital on all sides, and PES, the way we've been seeing it, is a misnomer, and we need to refine it. And the 3 paradigms that we see, the commodification, the compensation, and co-investment, they can play out in different ways. between the national, international border, the within-country designation and the co-investment. And back to our graph, we do see that Indonesia's president's commitment of 26% emission reduction, the NAMA, actually opened the door for REDD and opened the door for the Norwegian money and others. And it is misunderstood by many still in the country as what it is. It is an expression about we care. At the same time, it opens the door for keeping our business profile open and cleaning our act to the outside world. And probably that's in the end the more relevant part than REDD compared to how it has been narrowly defined. So back to our 5 challenges 5 years ago. Scope, definition, speed outside forest, interlinkage, leakage. Those 3 issues have de facto been resolved by Indonesia taking progress on the NAMA front. And REDD, you couldn't solve that within REDD, but you can solve it in a landscape frame. The 2 issues of rights recognition, fairness and efficiency are still as challenging now as they were in 2007, but a lot of people have put a lot more thought in it, and we've gone through a lot of the defensiveness and denial phase, and we're actually there starting to make progress on those fronts. This morning, Tony Lavinia, in another session that we had, said, well, REDD, the way we see it before, we don't see that coming this COP, and it might after 2015, we don't see the commitment for the deep cuts that's necessary to do it. Tony, personally, shift attention to how can we integrate agriculture, forest issues in landscape scales on that, and we welcome him to the group. Thank you.